scarcity amid such waste and opulence? I began stalking this question in the classroom, enrolling in courses that I hoped would help me make sense of my country and its confounding, unblushing inequality. I kept it up in graduate school at the University of Wisconsin, the only program that accepted my application, where I focused on the housing crisis. To get as close as I could to that problem, I moved to Milwaukee, living in a mobile home park and then a rooming house. I befriended families who had been evicted, and I followed them for months and then years, sleeping on their floors, watching their children grow up, laughing and arguing with them, and, later, attending some of their funerals. In Milwaukee, I met grandmothers living in trailers without heat. They spent the winter under blankets, praying that the space heaters didn't give out. I once saw an apartment full of kids, just kids, evicted on a rainy spring day. Their mother had died, and the children had chosen to go on living in the house until the sheriff came. In the years since, I've met poor Americans around the country striving for dignity and justice, or just plain survival, which can be hard enough. Home health aides in New Jersey who belonged to the full-time working homeless, fast food workers in California fighting for a living wage, and undocumented immigrants in Minneapolis organizing for affordable housing, communicating with their neighbors through the Google Translate app. This is who we are. The richest country on earth, with more poverty than any other advanced democracy. If America's poor founded a country, that country would have a bigger population than Australia or Venezuela. Almost 1 in 9 Americans, including 1 in 8 children, live in poverty. There are more than 38 million people living in the United States who cannot afford basic necessities, and more than 108 million getting by on $55,000 a year or less, many stuck in that space between poverty and security. More than 1 million of our public school children are homeless, living in motels, cars, shelters, and abandoned buildings. After arriving in prison, many incarcerated Americans suddenly find that their health improves because the conditions they faced as free but impoverished citizens were worse. More than 2 million Americans don't have running water or a flushing toilet at home. West Virginians drink from polluted streams, while families on the Navajo Nation drive hours to fill water barrels. Tropical diseases long considered eradicated, like hookworm, have re-emerged in rural America's poorest communities, often the result of broken sanitation systems that expose children to raw sewage. The United States annually produces $5.3 trillion more in goods and services than China. Our gross domestic product is larger than the combined economies of Japan, Germany, the United Kingdom, India, France, and Italy, which are the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th richest countries in the world. California alone has a bigger economy than Canada does. New York State's economy surpasses South Korea's. America's poverty is not for lack of resources. We lack something else. Books about poverty tend to be books about the poor. It's been this way for more than 100 years. In 1890, Jacob Riis wrote about how the other half lives, documenting the horrid conditions of New York tenements and photographing filthy children asleep in alleyways. A decade later, Jane Addams wrote about the sorry state of Chicago's immigrant workforce, a 13-year-old girl from Russia who committed suicide because she couldn't repay a $3 loan. A new mother forced to work so many hours that her breast milk soaked through her shirt. The Depression-era reportage of James Agee and Walker Evans and the photojournalism of Dorothea Lange seared images of dusty, kicked-down sharecroppers into our collective memory. In 1962, Michael Harrington published The Other America, a book intended to make visible tens of millions of human beings who had dropped out of sight and out of mind. 2 years later, Lyndon and Lady Bird Johnson paid a visit to Appalachia and sat on the rough-hewn porch of a jobless sawmill worker surrounded by children with small clothes and big teeth. Bearing witness, these kinds of books help us understand the nature of poverty. They are vital, but they do not, and in fact cannot, answer the most fundamental question, which is, why? Why all this American poverty? I've learned that this question requires a different approach. To understand the causes of poverty, we must look